The Picture of Dorian Gray. By Oscar Wilde. The Picture of Dorian Gray is a Gothic and philosophical novel by Oscar Wilde. First published complete in the July 1890 issue of Lippincott's monthly magazine. The Picture of Dorian Gray is the only novel written by Wilde. Dorian Gray is the subject of a full-length portrait in oil by Basil Hallward. An artist impressed and infatuated by Dorian's beauty, he believes that Dorian's beauty is responsible for the new mood in his art as a painter. Through Basil, Dorian meets Lord Henry Wotton. And he soon is enthralled by the aristocrat's hedonistic worldview. That beauty and sensual fulfillment are the only things worth pursuing in life. Newly understanding that his beauty will fade, Dorian expresses the desire to sell his soul, to ensure that the picture, rather than he, will age and fade. The wish is granted, and Dorian pursues a libertine life of varied amoral experiences while staying young and beautiful. All the while, his portrait ages and records every sin. Plot of the novel. The Picture of Dorian Gray begins on a beautiful summer day in Victorian England, where Lord Henry Wotton, an opinionated man, is observing the sensitive artist Basil Hallward painting the portrait of Dorian Gray, a handsome young man who is Basil's ultimate muse. While sitting for the painting, Dorian listens to Lord Henry espousing his hedonistic worldview and begins to think that beauty is the only aspect of life worth pursuing, prompting Dorian to wish that his portrait would age instead of himself. Under Lord Henry's hedonistic influence, Dorian fully explores his sensuality. He discovers the actress Sybil Vane, who performs Shakespeare plays in a dingy, working-class theatre. Dorian approaches and courts her, and soon proposes marriage. The enamored Sybil calls him Prince Charming, and swoons with the happiness of being loved, but her protective brother, James, warns that if Prince Charming harms her, he will murder him. Dorian invites Basil and Lord Henry to see Sybil perform in Romeo and Juliet. Sybil, too enamored with Dorian to act, performs poorly, which makes both Basil and Lord Henry think Dorian has fallen in love with Sybil because of her beauty instead of her acting talent. Embarrassed, Dorian rejects Sybil, telling her that acting was her beauty. Without that, she no longer interests him. On returning home, Dorian notices that the portrait has changed, his wish has come true. And the man in the portrait bears a subtle sneer of cruelty. Conscience-stricken and lonely, Dorian decides to reconcile with Sybil. But he is too late, as Lord Henry informs him that Sybil has killed herself. Dorian then understands that, where his life is headed, lust and beauty shall suffice. Dorian locks the portrait up, and over the following 18 years, he experiments with every vice. Influenced by a morally poisonous French novel that Lord Henry Wotton gave him. One night, before leaving for Paris, Basil goes to Dorian's house to ask him about rumors of his self-indulgent sensualism. Dorian does not deny his debauchery, and takes Basil to see the portrait. The portrait has become so hideous that Basil is only able to identify it as his by the signature he affixes to all of his portraits. Basil is horrified, and beseeches Dorian to pray for salvation. In anger, Dorian blames his fate on Basil and stabs him to death. Dorian then calmly blackmails an old friend, the scientist Alan Campbell, into using his knowledge of chemistry to destroy the body of Basil Hallward. Alan later kills himself. To escape the guilt of his crime, Dorian goes to an opium den, where James Vane is unknowingly present. James had been seeking vengeance upon Dorian ever since Sybil killed herself, but had no leads to pursue as the only thing he knew about Dorian was the name Sybil called him, Prince Charming. In the opium den, however, he hears someone refer to Dorian as Prince Charming, and he accosts Dorian. Dorian deceives James into believing that he is too young to have known Sybil, who killed herself 18 years earlier, as his face is still that of a young man. James relents and releases Dorian. but is then approached by a woman from the opium den who reproaches James for not killing Dorian. She confirms that the man was Dorian Gray and explains that he has not aged in 18 years. James runs after Dorian, but he has gone. James then begins to stalk Dorian, causing Dorian to fear for his life. However, during a shooting party, a hunter accidentally kills James Vane, who is lurking in a thicket. On returning to London, Dorian tells Lord Henry that he will live righteously from now on. His new probity begins with deliberately not breaking the heart of the naive Hetty Merton, his current romantic interest. Dorian wonders if his newly found goodness has rescinded the corruption in the picture, but when he looks at it, he sees only an even uglier image of himself. From that, Dorian understands that his true motives for the self-sacrifice of moral reformation were the vanity and curiosity of his quest for new experiences, along with the desire to restore beauty to the picture. Deciding that only full confession will absolve him of wrongdoing, Dorian decides to destroy the last vestige of his conscience and the only piece of evidence remaining of his crimes: the picture. In a rage, he takes the knife with which he murdered Basil Hallward and stabs the picture. The servants of the house awaken on hearing a cry from the locked room, on the street. A passerby who also heard the cry calls the police. On entering the locked room, the servants find an unknown old man stabbed in the heart, his figure withered and decrepit. The servants identify the disfigured corpse by the rings on its fingers, which belonged to Dorian Gray. Beside him, the portrait is now restored to its former appearance of beauty. End of the story. Thank you.